Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm so thrilled to be joined by our very, very good friend, Tamer Ghoneim. How are you, Tamer?
I'm fantastic. How are you doing, Tom, and community?
Yeah, super well. I'm really excited about this session. You know I'm a huge fan of your work personally. And for everyone tuning in, you can kind of see it behind Tamer. It's a little bit blurred out, but check it out. Very, very cool artist. Before we get into today's session, do you mind giving like a bit of context about the style of work you do and your whole world within this? Because it's kind of like, it's pretty niche, but it's so beautiful and it's so cool.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you and all the kind words and all the fantastic DC team. You guys are all cool, and whoever wrote the description for the class is a genius. I loved it. So it was brilliant. I laughed and smiled. But yeah, I'm primarily focused on doing blackletter calligraphy, so that's like the more Gothic styles, and I've really kind of run away with it. I don't do as much super traditional styles, like there's Fracture and Textura and all of these much more traditional styles. I kind of fall into the more like you might call them graffiti styles or freestyles that are a lot more freehand and exciting and fun to implement. So I do that, and then I also play around with turning blackletter calligraphy art into calligrams or like illustrations using abstract blackletter strokes. So that's another thing that I've had a lot of fun doing, and that's what we'll be talking about today and how to do that on the iPad and Procreate.
So yeah, without further ado, would you like to share your screen and we can get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So my plan today is I actually wanted to run through a quick presentation with everybody just to kind of go over what I'll be talking about, and then I'll jump right onto the iPad. I promise not too long on the presentation. Then I'll jump right on the iPad and we'll start having some fun. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, but just wanted to kind of give you a setup of what we're going to be going over today. So I'm going to share. Okay. So again, this won't be too long. I just wanted to kind of give you an introduction about everything we're going to go over today. So first off, as always, thank you. Again, this is always a dream come true for me to be here and to be chatting with everybody. So thanks, Tom and DC and the entire DC community. I'm so excited to be here. And I always like to try to communicate this. Like my goal here is to really, I want this to be one of the most helpful and useful sessions you've ever participated in. And so if you have any question, just ask. I will be as open and honest as I can. If I don't know something, I'll tell you, but please ask any questions you have. I'm happy and thrilled to help. So our goal today is basically to learn the fundamental steps involved with creating an abstract blackletter calligraphy illustration, right, using Procreate. So a few examples of these. The middle one was actually done by hand, but the ones on the left and the right were both done in Procreate. So you can probably tell I'm somewhat of a fan of Star Wars and comic books and stuff like that.
Who is that in the center, being very ignorant?
That is, he's an MMA fighter, George St. Pierre.
Okay. Every time I see that piece from you, it looks like a really angry, brooding Jeff Bezos.
He's a fellow Canadian, so I'm gonna have to give him some props. But he's a pretty nice guy, ironically. But you can imagine as an MMA fighter, he'd have to have a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, he looks pretty badass.
Yeah, so thanks. So these are just some examples of what we were talking about when I mentioned like using an abstract blackletter style to pull that in to make illustrations with it. And it creates a really fun and unique effect, and you can have a lot of fun with them. So a quick review of the supplies we'll be going through and using today. So hopefully you've got access to Procreate. That is the one thing I could not give you for free as part of the freebies. But as part of the freebie pack, you should have a couple of blackletter brushes, a grid image. I include some of those that we'll use in setting up, and then an image of the Joker, which is the one that I used to create the piece that was included with the promo material. So you can use that as a go-by as well. All right, and then just a quick review of the process. So the first step is I'll just kind of lead you into getting set up with the canvas. If I go too slow or too fast over anything, just let me know. We'll then get ready for setting up the illustration. We'll then start talking about how to actually construct the abstract using the blackletter strokes, and then some final steps like finishing elements and things like that, how to kind of finish off the piece to give it the really cool final look. And that is really it. That is the plan. So with that, I can jump onto the iPad and we can start having some fun.
Can't wait.
All right. So first thing we're going to do is just get the canvas set up. So I like to mention this. I'm going to slide over now. I won't be on camera, but So I just like to mention this because I'm not sure everybody is aware of it, but obviously you set up and start a new canvas here. If you need to make any changes, you can obviously customize them here. I've had a few people reach out to me before asking why their screens were low res and stuff like that, but you can obviously customize your canvas settings here. So I generally would recommend starting with something fairly high res so that you can get a good quality image out of the final thing. But if you weren't aware, you can also edit your color profile here if you need something specific for a final product and the time-lapse settings. So there are a lot of things, not just the dimensions of the canvas, that you can customize here. So just wanted everybody to be aware of that. But I'm going to start with just a standard kind of 4:5 ratio, and then we'll jump into the canvas. Okay, so I'm just going to create a brand new one. And there'll be a lot that I'm going to cover today, so I'll probably be going very fast because I'm going to cover a lot of the foundational elements and then try to get into the kind of the advanced idea of creating the illustration. So I will be going fast, but again, please ask me any questions. So now that I've got the canvas open, the first step is always I like to work on a black background. So I'm going to just adjust the background color. I'm going to go here with the classics. I'm going to make it black. All right. So now I've got the background color set up. And then the next step will be, I always lay down a grid. And the reason that we use the grid is because it will help us keep our lines consistent vertically and horizontally, and can help with diagonals as well if we're drawing strokes on a diagonal. Okay, so let me just pick a white brush. And I'll use the standard nib. Again, slow me down if I'm going too fast or anything.
And you're using some of the free brushes that you kindly provided for everyone following along.
That's correct. So this studio pen is just a default Procreate brush. I just pulled it in here so that it would be easy to access. And then I believe these two brushes, this one's pressure sensitive, so it's not as useful for doing these abstracts, but it can be if you want to experiment and play around. But this is the one that I would recommend using. Standard nib, and it's at a 45-degree angle. That's much easier to work with.
Amazing.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, again, is lay down a grid. So there are brushes, like in some of my packs, there are brushes that will let you just draw a grid on. You can also just pull an image in. So I'm going to pull a file in. So I went to the toolbar and then inserted a file. And then I'm going to go back to, let's see, my cloud drive. Okay, grid guide images. So I provided a fine grid and a wider grid for you. I'm going to use the fine grid, and then I also gave it to you in black and white. Because we'll be working on a black background, I'm going to use the white one this time. So I'm just going to click on the white grid. And then I've got my grid laid out just like this. If you want to move it around, you can obviously slide it around just by moving it. And then to keep it locked in place, I'm going to untap there. And now my grid is locked in place. So one key thing, and this is kind of transitioning now into the second step. So I'm going to start talking about getting the image ready, like the illustration, and also, so getting the illustration ready, and then also kind of the basic setup for getting the image in.
Okay,
so,
I'm loving the production value that you've got your own bottom slides. What is
Thank
this
you.
story, Tamer?
I went all out
behind the scenes.
Just to kind of help break things up. And I'm trying to go over the top with this one. I'm going for I want the 5 stars or the gold star, whatever the sticker you would get in the first grade.
You got it, man.
On your homework. So now getting set up with the illustration. So again, one key thing that I always want to make sure I emphasize for people is really make sure you're working on different layers. This way, it's very disappointing when you created a very elaborate illustration and then your grid is right behind it still. So I'm going to create a new layer, and now I'm going to pull in the reference image. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to rotate the canvas because I'm going to be working on this kind of a landscape or widescreen type format. And then again, I'm going to go here to the corner. I'm going to insert a file, and now I'm going to go back to recent or iCloud Drive. Okay. There we go. Joker images. So now I'm going to pull in the Joker image. So now all you really want to do is kind of center it where you would want to position it on the canvas. So I'm just going to, slide his face around to wherever I want it. And I do want to mention, so when I'm doing some of the hand-drawn illustrations, you can use a reference image. You can draw an image. There are a lot of options. If you're working in Procreate on the iPad, especially just starting out with this technique, this is a great way to do it because you've already got the image laid out for you. It's a photograph, so it's pretty hard to go wrong with the photo, right? So you can just use this as a background reference layer and then lay in your calligraphy on top of it. And it ends up obviously being very photorealistic because you've got the photo in the background. And this is the image that I use to create the one that I've shared on Instagram and that I have here that we'll be going through today. So once you've kind of got the image placed where you want, you can make it bigger. You could obviously tilt it. Then we're just going to lock that in place. And now I've got my illustration kind of reference image, right? Now I need the grid to be on top of that picture. So I'm just going to take my grid layer and then slide it back on top. Okay. So that's kind of the basis for starting these abstracts, is picking your image. And then I always recommend using a grid because consistency in the strokes is really what makes this look, gives it kind of that beautiful look, is the consistency in the line directions and stuff. So now I've basically got the illustration laid out, set. And now I'm ready to start working on the abstract calligraphy. And this is where I plan for us to spend most of our time today. So, because I'm sure this is probably the biggest question. So I'm now going to jump into actually working on the illustration. Okay.
Yeah,
so
good setup.
I should mention too, since we're working on this one in color, a couple of things that you can do. So you can, sorry, wrong layer. If I want to, if I'm going to be doing a color Blackletter illustration, I want to use colors from this image, right? If I'm trying to replicate this look. So a couple of ways you can do that. So if I click here on my colors, if I click on the palettes, the first I can just create a brand new one. Okay, so here it is. I'll set that as the default. Okay, and then go back to my classic. So here you can see I've got a blank color palette here. And then using my brush, if I just hold down to this little square here in the left side of the screen and then do a long press, I'll get the color picker. Okay, it used to just be a long press, but this will just let me pick a color from anywhere on the canvas. And then like if I like that purple, I can just go and now tap any spot on my palette. And now I've got that color to use as a reference. The other newer option for doing this that's also great is I can just create a color palette based on the photo. Sorry, that's the got to see pictures of my cute little nephew. So from the file. So right there, and you can see it just created a complete palette just based on this photo. All right, so now we've got our color palette. Now we're kind of ready to start transitioning into the illustration, the actual illustration construction, right? So this is where I plan to spend most of the time because I know this is what a lot of people are most curious about. So I'm going to start with this is the 45-degree broad edge nib, okay? And I'm going to pick a white color just so that it's easiest for you to see, okay? And then I'm going to make the brush big just to kind of get this point across. So the hardest thing to figure out when working on this technique is how to actually construct the abstract. And it's really not that hard. I want to make sure everybody's clear that there's no magic to this. It's some practice and just learning some foundation skills. A lot of that's what I cover in the progress. But I'm going to take one letter from the alphabet. I'll write it here in a Blackletter style, and then we'll kind of deconstruct it and figure out where the strokes can come from. So I'm going to just start with like a capital C. So here's what is a common construction for a C, and then sometimes there'll be like a little flourish there. So that is a capital or a majuscule C in a Blackletter style. So if I take this C, and I'm going to use just a studio pen. This is, again, just a default Procreate brush. And I'm going to grab a red color just so that I can draw now. So if I just kind of deconstruct these lines, I'm going to start with this one, okay? So if I take that one, and I just took this initial stroke from the C, and I'm left with kind of a moon shape, right?
Yep.
The next step, like if I take the second stroke that I made over here, now I'm left with just a vertical stroke, right? That looks like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just keeping moving on through these. If I deconstruct this one, I end up with kind of a diagonal line, right? Which I can then modify into a little bit of an S shape, or like a little bit of a kind of a C shape, more of like circular than S shaped. So I can deconstruct that one.
And Tamer, just to give the design cutters with us a bit of context, you've been doing this style of lettering for a while, but you're kind of relatively new to Procreate. Is that right?
Yeah,
I remember when you hadn't used it, you'd just been working in analog for years, but you really seem to have taken to it very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Procreate's amazing. Tom's right. I was very much analog up until I would say early last year, and then I really, especially when I wanted to create kind of a brush pack for it, I dabbled with Procreate, but I took a deeper dive last year, just so about a year, I guess now would be 2 years, into starting to use Procreate, and it's a fantastic tool. It's so much fun, and you can create so many things. I don't think of it as like a competition to the analog stuff. I think of it as just another way to create.
I agree. And yeah, the reason I wanted to share that is, Tamer is incredibly talented, but at the same time, he hasn't been using Procreate for like a decade or anything. Well, it hasn't been around a decade, but you know what I mean? It hasn't been years and years. He's also relatively new. And I feel like the breakdown you're seeing here, anyone watching could make these markings, right? It's super.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what I'm trying to achieve here. If I draw a super fancy C with all sorts of, flourishes and stuff like that, it looks very unapproachable. But when I just take one letter and break it down into, like, most people, I'm sure you could draw a moon or a C shape, right? I'm sure you could draw a vertical line. And again, that's why we laid down the grids in the first step, right? Is to even help us draw it even more vertically. So you can draw a vertical line. You can draw a little squiggle, right? We all do this stuff all the time. So I'm trying to communicate that I'm not some sort of a mega genius when it comes to calligraphy. I've just practiced a lot, and I really love this. So I want you to know that you can do this. I absolutely want you to believe that you can do this. That's one of the things I try to get through to people, is there's really no magic here. So just like Tom's saying, I did not develop Procreate, the app, and I've not been using it for decades. I'm fairly new, and you can still have tons of fun. And there's so much to learn. It's just a fun experience.
Yeah.
So continuing on and just breaking down this last one, I'm even from this one little squiggle, I'm gonna pull two shapes out of this. So the first one I'm gonna pull out of it is, it's a small line. So I'm gonna pull a diamond out, right? I'm just gonna turn. It's just a very short stroke that creates that kind of a diamond look, right? And then the other element, I'll just slide it here, will be just a horizontal stroke. Okay. Again, it's not rocket science or brain surgery. These are all lines that any one of us can make these, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really what I wanted to point out is, like, I started with the C. I've just kind of pulled it apart and turned it into some individual strokes. And now the key is really just, how am I gonna, I just need to figure out how to combine all of these, right? I'll just go with green and here, yellow. So now what I'm gonna do is turn this into what I'm calling abstract patterns, right? So I'm gonna combine this with, let me grab my little brush. So I'm gonna combine this shape with this shape. I'm gonna combine it with this one. I'm gonna combine these two, right? It's just a matter of pulling all of these different shapes together and creating patterns. So, excuse me. So what do I mean? I'm gonna hide this layer, and then we'll start fresh. So one pattern that I like to use. Let me go back to. We'll just keep it yellow because that's bright. So one pattern that I like to use a lot is, I'll use like that moon shape, right? That C looking shape, and then I'll draw a vertical line into it, right? So that's one way of combining those two, right? I could also draw, take the line up a little higher and pull it vertically down, right? That one's not super straight. That's why we use grid lines. So just pull it vertically down, right? And now I've created a combination of the two shapes that we used from the C. now I can, okay, so again, all I did was I started with a stroke. You just need to put one stroke down. So starting with the C, right? Like so. And then I'm going to pull just a vertical line down through it. and this, I'm going to draw a little bit of attention to this because this is something that I see a lot. I'm going to go back to the red. Right here. So one thing I see when people try this technique is they'll keep the shapes too separated. So they may draw a C, and then they'll just draw a line like that, and then they may draw a little squiggle, and then they may draw a line here. But they'll never do what I did here, which is to overlap the lines. And this little tip adds a whole lot of cohesion to your abstract piece. So instead of ending the line here, it can be good to drag it all the way through, right? So rather than having just kind of a canvas full of individual shapes, it starts to feel like one more cohesive piece. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, and you can kind of see the difference between me drawing the line straight through and just creating a bunch of individual shapes.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
I mean, both look pretty beautiful, but yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to clear this in and I'll start fresh. We'll just go white. Okay. And then again, I'm flying through these brush changes, but I'm really just using basically a pointer and then the shapes. So again, I'll just start with my C shape, right? And then I'll draw a line through it, right? Now the next thing I'll ask is, okay, what could I do next? So I'm always looking at the negative space, right? So I've got some, I'm going to just keep the big brush. I've got some negative space here. I've got some negative space here, right? I've got some negative space there. I just undid my straight line, right? So in this negative space, maybe I can add a couple of diamonds, right? Like that. And now, okay, that one even based on the width it connected to there, that works, right? Now with this space here, maybe I even make this a little bit longer, and now I can draw kind of a J shape. Again, I'm only using the shapes that I pulled out of that letter C, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I can use the J. Okay, so now I see I've got some space here. I've got some space here. So what might fit in there? I might, again, just using the shapes we pulled from before, I could create a horizontal line, and again, making sure that I'm creating some intersections, right? Not just drawing the shape so that they touch or don't touch. Again, I'm overlapping them, right? So now I've got a large vertical space here. So I could draw another vertical line, right? And maybe just curl the tip down there. Now I've got an area of space here. So I could just draw a diagonal line, right? I'm not doing anything terribly fancy or elaborate. I'm just trying to look for where I've got negative space and start filling in those gaps. So now I've got another long space. A second tip while you're using this style is it can be really tempting to fill the spaces with this diamond, and then you end up with a piece that's got diamonds all over it. So another kind of a tip when you're working in this style is to try to creatively use the other shapes to fill the space instead of just putting diamonds everywhere. Okay, so I created this horizontal line. Maybe I can just use another vertical line right here, right?
So you're just kind of going by what feels right at this point. There's no...
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Again, I'm just leveraging my few basic shapes, right, that I had from before.
Yeah, so we got the C, the diamond, the downstroke.
Right, the horizontal.
Yeah, super useful.
I really tried to spend a lot of time trying to come up with the brushes that would be useful. I mean, to the degree that I was even playing around with the thickness of that little spot in the corner. So Tom can tell you, I initially had like 5,000 brushes that I was playing around with. Yeah, I wanted them just to feel very comfortable to work with. So, and I mean, another thing, just like a Procreate tip, there are ways to do this by hand, but in Procreate, if you play with the opacity, right, you can start to get some layered effects too, which can be a lot of fun. right? So I can start to layer the brushes, and then you get some cool
Ooh.
just based on the transparency. And then, like if you're using a pressure sensitive brush, which I have a few in the product, like you can actually just based on the pressure, you can add some like 3D looks, right?
I see you do this a lot in your work as well, and it looks
So this can be a lot of fun too, because you can create just some 3D shapes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then like Tom had mentioned, I do have like I did create some brushes that have like marble textures and stuff, so you can start playing around with marble textures and things like that. So
Everyone's liking the opacity a lot.
Yeah, the opacity is really fun to play with, and the pressure sensitivity, because you can create. I mean, I'll just jump back really quickly because I know I need to move on to the illustration. But like you can create stuff like this is just me playing around with some abstract shapes one day, and that's just using pressure sensitive brushes and laying like a big brush on top of a smaller one and stuff. So you can do a lot of really fun stuff.
You know what's cool? Before I would have seen that and my mind would have been boggled and I wouldn't know where to start. And now I'm like, okay, so that's 3 diamonds and then a reverse C, and I can start to see it now.
Yeah. So now
go about that.
Thanks. Yeah. So like if I jump into this now, like, and I zoom way in, you can see like this is the Joker, right? That was in all of the promotional stuff that I've posted on Instagram. So you can see I've used some of the shapes or many of the shapes over and over, right? Here's a diamond. Sorry, I just tapped on the palette. Straight horizontal line, vertical line, vertical line, vertical line, vertical line, diagonal, vertical, right, horizontal. So you see, it's really just about building it up. Here's the diagonal S shape that I just showed repeated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like when you zoom from way out here, it looks like, holy, this is how on earth. But like when you just break it down into some of the core elements, it becomes much more approachable. And this was the second abstract I ever tried creating.
Oh wow!
Because and that's why I did it on the iPad, because I wasn't sure how I would approach it on doing it by hand. So I first tried it using the iPad and Procreate because I could undo and stuff like that. So this is the second one. The first one was Darth Vader over here. And again, similar concept. Here's the background art layer that I used to practice this one first to start.
It's pretty sweet. And even the second one I can see is like more advanced. It seems it has more depth, shading to it, and
right. Yeah, this one I tried it in color to see if that would work. One thing that if you've seen me on social media or anything like that, one thing that I'm always encouraging people to do is just play. Like have a good time with what you're practicing. It's not like, especially when you're in Procreate, there's nothing you can't undo. So just have fun, try colors. So when I was creating this one, the things that I wanted to experiment with in my head were the green color, like doing one in color, doing an actual photograph, trying some shading to see if I could make it look real. So this was really just an experiment, and then it came out okay in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so now if I move back to the canvas, I'm gonna keep building on this idea right now with the illustration. So we've already set up, I've added some stuff on top of it, but we've got our illustration layer, right? And we've got our grid layer. So the first thing what I would do when I'm approaching this is, like, number one, I'm obviously not going to work at full brightness. So I'm going to reduce the opacity so that I can still see the picture, but so that I can also see what I'm writing on top of it, right? So I'll usually just kind of reduce the opacity until it's clear enough that I can see it, right? But it's not overwhelmingly bright. And then the same thing with the grid layer. I'm going to take the opacity down. I just tap the N, and I'm going to take the opacity down. I usually end up around 12. That might be hard for you to see on the screen share, so I'll keep it a little bit.
You see it.
That's okay.
Yep.
12, around that range for me, ends up being the point where I can still see it clearly, and I can see it while I'm working. And then, but it's still clear. So the next step that I'll kind of approach when I'm looking at these is trying to look for basically value sections. And I'll explain that here in 1 second. So again, I'm just going to emphasize again, work on another layer so that you can always go back and turn layers on and off. So I work on a lot of layers. And then I'll maybe merge some together at the end if I want. But I tend to create a lot of layers, and then that keeps me from it gives me the ability to continue to turn things on and off. So what did I mean now when I was saying, let's kind of look at the, I'm going to go back to the sample brushes. So what do I mean when I'm looking for areas of value difference? So I'm looking for like, what areas of brightness do I want to be basically the same tone? Where do I want there to be darker areas, especially if I'm working on this color? So if I'm looking at this picture of the Joker, I would tend to, I'm going to use red again. So I look at this picture and I say, okay, there's a bright value area over here, right? Like around the squiggles, around the wrinkles in his forehead. Like this kind of right part of his face is all pretty bright, right? Down into here. And then like right around the chin, it breaks up over here. So I'm gonna, if I'm working in color, like which is what I'm doing in this instance, I'm gonna start working with the brighter white tones for this area, right? So I'm gonna come into here. I'll just leave these little squiggles so you can see. And then I'll start building in the patterns. And I tend to zoom way in. So I'm gonna go back to my calligraphy brush, and I'm gonna make the size much smaller. I'll just test opacities down. So I'll just test. Okay.
Create a new layer at this point.
Yes.
Same layer as the red. Otherwise, you're like, oh no.
Exactly. Just like Tom said. So now I would just start with this, with like this area, right? I normally wouldn't draw the red squiggle. I just want it to be clearly apparent. And then I'll start with, again, just laying in my shape. So I could, for me, instinctively, I just drew a straight line here, right? I could have just as easily started with the moon shape, right? Could have started with one of the S squiggles. So just start laying down the line and kind of fill in the space. So I drew the vertical. Every instinct inside of me makes me want to draw a diagonal line after that, and then I want to connect it again with another. You can, especially in these little tiny spots, repeat the shapes a little bit. So I could repeat this idea again just to kind of fill in the space, right? Now maybe I've used that a little bit too much, so I'm going to use a couple of diamonds, being aware that I don't want to use the diamonds too much. And then maybe here I go for a long vertical line all the way down. And now I see I've got some space over here on this side, so maybe I'll use that kind of half moon shape, right?
So it doesn't matter that you're loosely going outside the lines because it's broad within that shape.
Yeah, right. Like, and again, this is like it's a tiny part. But yeah, I mean, Tom's called me out on a good point here. So I might maybe save the long vertical line for over here, right? And then merge it into something like that. So Tom's keeping me in check.
How do you pick the brush size relative to the illustration size? Like, how do you decide how fine or how thick it should be?
That is a fantastic question. I tend to go, it can vary. Like, if I go back to my like the different art pieces, like I used a fairly small one here for Darth Vader, but then if I go back to like here with this Venom face, I did a combination of large ones and small ones. So it
depends on how intricate you want the piece to look, but both can work.
Yeah, I would say, so what I would recommend is like, do like what I did here. I'm sorry, I'm switching between too many canvases. So do like what I did here. Draw a few strokes and then zoom back out and say, okay, does that look like it's too big or too small? To me right now, they actually look a little bit too big. So I would probably go back, go back into the details, reduce the size again, maybe to 5, and then go, okay, that looks probably a little bit fine or more fine that I can get the detail I want. The difference that the brush size is going to make is really just the amount of detail that you can get in, I'm going to go back to the red brush layer. What the brush size will ultimately translate to is how much detail do you want to be able to replicate in like in sections of the drawing. So if I look at the Joker's eye right here, right? Or maybe, they're both pretty good. So there's like a vague circle shape, right? Kind of like that. That makes him look like Spider-Man now. Spider Joker. But within that, right, there are all these like intricate. I'm going to use a smaller brush for this one now. There are all of these intricate, right, like detailed hatches and stuff like that, right? Like all of these little detail lines. So if I use an enormous broad nib, right? If I use a really big brush, my ability to really like capture the nuances, I'm going to go back to white and then pick my layer up again. So my ability to capture the, oh, it's hidden. I need to go to this one. So my ability to capture kind of the nuances of the details of this area, if I just create 2 strokes, are completely gone, right?
Yeah.
But you may want to do that. Like that's perfectly fine. So for me, it comes down to 2 things. How much, number one is how much detail. I'm going to use my pen. I'm a whiteboard person. So like one, how much detail, right? Do I want to be able to replicate in the abstract, right? And then number 2 is more practical, but how much time? Like to do the original Joker one was probably 10 to 15 hours just because I was learning, I was experimenting. And there's so much, like it was very, very fine brush, right? Or a very small size brush. So it just took forever to fill the space, right? It just took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I use a bigger brush, I'll be done more quickly. So it really boils down to these 2 things. So there's no 100% right answer, but that's what I would boil it down to.
Okay. You kind of showed in the Venom example how you mixed bigger brushstrokes and smaller ones, capturing more detail. Do you ever do that to kind of show things like depth of field or anything like that, where you go from very intricate small brushstrokes to much bigger ones, and that alone will create a depth of subject? Is that a thing?
I've never. That's a fascinating idea. I've never done that myself. But it's a really cool idea. It would definitely be worth trying. I've done stuff in Procreate where you like can blur layers to make it seem like you, like this is an example where I wrote the word cosmic and then I used the ink splatter brushes that I created. Cancel. And then like you can just create different layers with the ink splatter brushes. Like they're down here, and then you can blur them, and that kind of creates a level of depth in the image. But I've not tried that with abstract. It's a great question.
Leave a comment if you like that cosmic piece. It's really cool. Anyway, I'll stop interrupting, Tamer. Back to you.
No, I love the questions, but that question, fantastic idea. It would definitely be worth trying and playing around with. Now you've got me thinking. So thank you. That's a great question. So the last couple of things that I'll mention here, because I'm probably getting close to time. The first thing is, again, remember my first tip was don't be afraid to cross lines, right? So start crossing lines, and then that might give me some more new ideas. Now I've created like a separation of this space and this space, right? Which may let me fill the spaces a little bit differently, right? So you just kind of keep working through it, just using, again, all I've done here is use, I think it was 5 shapes that I pulled out of one letter of the alphabet, right? The letter C. And we're creating an abstract design from that. So there's a few more shapes in the toolkit. I just didn't want to overwhelm with too much here.
Yeah.
But really that's the key. And then the last step to really, really kind of sell the effect. And I'm just going to go to the original image just to show. And before I do that, I'll show you the brushes, and then I'll show it to you on the image.
I think Tamer mentioned it took hours originally. So we don't have time to kind of watch him fill every single part of this piece with shapes, but you understand. I mean, let us know if you do understand in the comments that method, because I think it's relatively simple how Tamer's broken it down, but then it's just taking the time to fill up those shapes.
Yeah, and it's very meditative. So you just kind of have fun with it. The good thing about Procreate, you can keep on doing, right? So it's exactly what Tom said. So it's just a matter of time. I would love to fill this up for you, but I'm guessing you don't want to sit here with me for 3 to 4 hours. I mean, it could be fun, but
I don't know about that. Yeah.
we might get bored.
And just said this hour's gone by too fast. I could watch Tamer.
Yeah, it's already flown by. Yeah,
we need a 4-hour live stream with Tamer.
I'm in for it. We could start what's the one where people play games all the time? I can't remember. We'll start it. Oh, Discord? No, it's not Discord.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean.
We'll start a channel there. We'll just do calligraphy all the time. But again, so to finish up with a couple of points, the first one was, if you remember, I mentioned this bit about the value selection. So now when I get into this darker area, that's where I might start to pull in a darker brush, right? And start to, fill in.
Yeah, we had a few questions about this.
That area of the drawing. And now you can see it's just by nature of what I've done, it's a little bit darker, or, I may even use a darker shade, right? So that's going to be really hard to see. But
yeah,
but the idea is that, like, I'm looking for those value areas to try to just use distinct shape, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing a bunch of gradients and stuff like that. I'll pull off the 3D using the last bit of info that I'll share with you next.
Okay, so with those different values, do you define areas like you have done with the red outline, or do you just do it by eye and kind of gradually transition as you're filling out blocks of shape? So
for me, I'll do it by eye. I just do it by eye. I'll kind of see these patterns, and then you'll need to make some judgment calls too. Like if you look at, and I'll go to it next. If you look at the final version, I didn't fill in. Let me go back to my pen. Like, I didn't fill in these areas of. Let me pick a color you can actually see. I didn't fill in these areas of his forehead, right? I left them black because I knew I wanted that contrast there, right? So rather than fill them in with a skin color, I just left them black because I wanted that contrast in the colors.
Got it.
So I wanted that to be clear. So you need to make there are some artistic judgments that you have to make along the way.
Could you just use a clipping mask after to do the different shades? So do it all in white and then paint over it on a new layer with a clipping mask to apply some gradients and that kind of thing?
Yeah, you absolutely could. That's another great tip. You could fill this entire area in, right, with white, and then I could just create a new layer and do a clipping mask, right? Sorry, clipping mask here, and then like just start to shade in with colors and stuff like that too. So that is absolutely valid too. That's another way. So you could, when I created this initially, I was obviously just learning and kind of inventing this idea. So I wasn't thinking about very, smooth gradients and stuff like that. I was just trying to get the idea down. But fantastic idea. You could absolutely do that.
Do you mind sharing the final outcome just so we can understand how to put those shades together?
Yeah. So the last step, I'm going to go real quick final demo here. So the last step was really quick. I'm going to show so the way that I added the shading was you could do it with just a smooth spray paint brush, but I used like these ink spray brushes that I created. They created a little bit of texture too. So I would just use these to shade in the edges to kind of get the shading look, obviously using a black brush to create these kind of dark spots. And then it gives it the little bit of a shading look. So what does that look like practically? So if I go to this one, so here's the finished piece, right? The one that was in all of the materials that you saw, and that, but like I'll show a final demo of, but here's the layer. So here's without the shading, right?
This is what people have been asking about, and this is what I was trying to figure out. So most of it is actually just white, and we can see there's a few areas where it's solid light gray, but not many. Right. There's only really white or light gray. There's not like endless shade.
Exactly. Yeah, I basically picked 4 colors, I think. So white, red, green, and purple. And then I picked at most 3 shades of each of those and just used that to fill it in.
What is this final magic step, Tamer?
The wizardry, the final wizardry. Yes. So this is where I tell you, like, for $5,000, I'll tell you this last. So it really is. And remember, like, we started this with a photograph, right? So here's my underlying art, or my underlying photographic image, right? The one that you've all got in the package. The bit that really tends to sell this is the shading. And all I do is I'll look at, kind of the areas like the edges and the eye circles and stuff like that. And then I'll just apply shading. So I'll show you the finished here, right? I'll just, with the layer turned on and off.
That adds so much.
It makes a huge difference. So it's really just about going in with a brush like this one. You could use any, like one of the default spray brushes or any of the ones that I've got in the packs that I created, which like I added a rotation to these so it would be actually very randomized so it doesn't look like a pattern. So all it really comes down to is that like zooming in, and then like within here, I'm just going to start like shading, see like shading this area in the middle. I'll try to move my hand a little bit. So
is that 100% opacity? It looks like.
Yeah, currently it's at 100% opacity, but you can play with that. You can do some areas where the opacity is higher, and then somewhere it's lower, right? So now I've pulled that up. There's a little bit of shading to the eye. If I like pull that.
So much depth already. And Tamer, is that via a clipping mask or just painted on top with the same color background?
Right. When I did it the first time, it's just painted on top, but I would definitely now I would do it on my clipping mask. So what I would probably do, because I'm paranoid about like losing artwork. So you can see here, I actually created each of the individual to stress my bit about I always work with lots of layers. Yeah. I did the different color sections as mouth. So like quick tip, what I would usually do so I can preserve these is I'll do like select this layer, just right swipe to get all of these selected, right? And then I would duplicate them, or sorry, I would group them together. I've forgotten my own process. So group them together. That's easy. Duplicate the group, right? Pull this out. Now I can just pinch down, squeeze all of these into one, and then pull that out, and that's my illustration, my full illustration, without this background layer, right? See, like that. And now I could do a clipping mask of this, and it'll just clip to the areas of the illustration.
Yeah, which I think is smart, because then you could add a different background.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did a different background without the clipping mask, you get these black blobs covering up the background.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like what Tom's saying, if I go back to my layers and change the white background, or like let's change it to something that's not as terrible. I'm sorry. I change the background to like, I don't know, like a dark gray. If I remove this clipping mask, like it just looks like black blobs, like he's saying, right in the middle. Whereas if I keep the clipping mask on, it just adheres to the parts of the art underneath it.
Got it.
So yes, that is the last magic step.
That's the magic step. So you obviously shaded pretty extensively. Do you keep that splatter type brush at 100% opacity, or do you drop the opacity and kind of shade a bit more delicately for some parts?
Sometimes, so for something like this, I'll probably just start at 100% for the darkest areas, right? So like if I'm transitioning from, I knew I wanted the eyes to be very black, so transitioning from there, I would keep them at 100%. But as I'm playing around in different areas, like if it's like if I go back to, let's just pick the original image, if it's maybe an area like here where there's a bunch of different, different lighter values in it, but I still want to shade, I might reduce the opacity to 50% or 40 or 30 or 20, and then I'll usually go lower, like 20, and then just layer as I see, like as I build up the tones.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That which would get us to the finished look here.
Stunning.
And that, yeah, so like the lower opacity areas are probably around here in the hair areas, but like now hopefully I've demystified. You can see what's in the hair, right? It's a lot of individual strokes similar to what we've already talked about, right?
I'm amazed in 1 hour you've taken me from looking at your work and thinking I could never, what a complete, mystery wrapped in an enigma. And now I'm like, oh, actually that feels achievable. I mean, it would take me some time, but I feel like I completely understand your process now. So thank you so much.
Thanks. So you'll be starting your own accounts now. They'll be Tom, the Blackletter Master.
Yeah, I'm going to name Tamer Ross.
So yeah, no, I'm happy to help. This stuff is a lot of fun to do. The process for doing it by hand is quite a bit different, obviously, than the iPad.
Absolutely.
But like at least hopefully you can see technique wise, you can kind of see what's going on. And I'll share another like really quick last thing, and I promise I'll stop talking.
No, this is
like
great.
I'll also, I don't know if you notice, maybe some stealthy people noticed, I'll also often incorporate words into this. So if you look here, like here's kind of a J, O, K, and then sort of an E right there, and then sort of an R. So I'll actually incorporate words into this too that you can kind of sneak in. That's like, I did that all over the place in this one. Here's another J, another O, another K.
So cool.
Another E. So you can do a lot of fun things with this stuff.
It's amazing. I love it. That you putting the Apple Pencil down, that was like your form of a mic drop, I feel.
My mic drop. All right, peace. We're out. No,
so good.
Time lapse replay. So you can see it's really just a matter of me filling in all of the spaces.
This is how fast Tamer actually works, guys.
Exactly. This is real time.
Very efficient.
So yeah, see the whole thing, and then at the very end, you'll see like the shading added. It took a lot longer than this, but that's the little shading step. And I even played around with some backgrounds and stuff back here. So you can do so much in Procreate. Just experiment.
Amazing.
Oh,
Damn. What a great session. As I say, we'd love to have you back in future if you'd like to.
Thank you. I would love to be back. And anyone, reach out to me anytime with any questions. I'm happy to help. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. And everyone, please go support Tamer. We linked up all of his profiles, his website, and of course, those blackletterfreebies.com. Go take advantage of those, as well as checking out his DC store. It really is a treasure trove. So jump into the fun world of Blackletter. It's a pretty cool place to be. What can I say?
Yeah, it's fun for me. It's fun for me. Yeah. And again, thank you all so much. You have no idea how much I appreciate this.
Thank you, Tamer. We will see you soon. And bye, Tamer.
Bye everyone. Bye, guys. Take care.